ladies and gentlemen, from your when you look at your program, we're supposed to be taking our health break, and we have tea waiting for us out there. But you realize we still have one session that I would request that we borrow some minutes, that we go through this session as well, because it's very important. Byron, wherever you are. Byron, this session will be moderated by Byron. But in the meantime, the next panelist, please get ready for the next session, as we'll be discussing the role of private sector in Kenya, in the Kenyan space industry. In the meantime, DJ, as we wait for the next session to start, and we take a short breather. You're not ready yet, but all right. I'll just request the following panelists, please take your positions on the stage. Philip Thigo is the Senior Director of Africa Thunderbird School of Global Management. You're welcome, sir. Dr. Musemi Gakuru is the board member of Kenya Space Agency. Dr. Mohamed El Kosi is the CEO Egyptian Space Agency. Dr. Samuel Donkor is the president ANUC. Please, if you're here, take your position on the stage. Eric Nyadimo is the managing director of Car Services. I hope I said that right. Susan Murabana is the CEO, the Traveling Telescope. Please take your positions so we can begin this session. All right, I'm informed Eric is not around, and so we'll begin. Thank you, lady. Thank you, gentlemen. But first, let's listen to a keynote speech from Dr. Philip Thigo. Karibu.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I know it's a great bit of shift, but good afternoon again. Can people stand up just a bit? Just for 1 second. See, this is how you know if people are listening to you. And can you take some space and just stretch? Take some space and stretch. Thank you very much. We can sit down. I wanted everybody before we start this session to know that at least you went to space. Right? My role is very simple. My moderator is here. Is to walk you through potentially the role of private sector, especially in Kenya in the space industry. I prepared this presentation with a colleague of mine who worked for the Sophia mission, and so we think this is what potentially is opportunity. I'm trying to move. Can I have? Where do I put this? Okay, sorry. Quickly, I'm Philip Thigo. I wear a couple of hats. UNDP World Economic Forum. So I really speak from a developmental perspective and not necessarily from a commercial, from a very commercial point of view. You can find me online on that. I'm based at Arizona State University, but we have a hub here in Nairobi. We are very much focused around how to be inclusive and not to be exclusive. We really want to see how universities and their research advance public value and public goods, and finally, not just being uprooted, but very much embedded in the economic and social well-being of the society. We have quite a big space program in Arizona State University. We've basically built what we call an ASU space enterprise, and our focus really is early stage companies around space, but also then try and connect with established organizations. We still have potentially one of the largest NASA grants. In August, we actually the lead principal PI for the Psyche mission that we very much democratized, even created a children's book around how to drive the story of space from a very inclusive perspective. The evolution of space economy, of course, we know there was a pre-rocketary space and there's first space race that was very much big companies. The second, of course, piece was very much around then the Chinese and the Europeans. The third piece really, which you say space 3.0, is where I feel Kenya sits. We do not necessarily have the previous capabilities of the previous years, but because technology has become more reachable, there's very much international cooperation around science, there's very much around technology transfer, but also democratization of some certain systems and knowledge. And so we think now countries like Kenya can join in the space race, but very differently. Trying to... Previously, expenditures, as you know, are governments. This is too small. I will not bother you with this. But you can see the expenditure, right? So the bigger the government, the more the expenditure. And so some of us, we are not even in that story. But I think over time, we've seen our private sector really getting into the space economy. And this is the first time we saw civilian missions flying to orbit. Interesting enough, the Kenya Space Agency, founded in 2017, is very much a civilian/military space agency, and therefore we see the potential for Kenya, just from the policy perspective, being able to create that kind of enabling environment where private sector can meaningfully participate. We know now that there's quite some substantial investment that is coming from private sector into space, with SpaceX and Blue Origin, of course. I know Planet is in the room somewhere, and we're seeing a lot of those investments. I mean, that has basically jumped from $1 billion 10 years ago to about $5 or $6 billion this year. And that money really is being funded and really put into the space ecosystem. So for space in Kenya, let me go very quickly. I think you've seen this in the morning. I will not belabor this point. But the point now that we have a space agency and have deployed a satellite creates an interesting political and economic environment to show that these things are possible, especially for a country like Kenya. Of course, the problem is, as you see the red arrow, we are still struggling in terms of how we invest in the space economy, and this is something that I know the space agency is pushing very hard. But then, why space, and why should we be in the space race? To break it down really, it's how do we turn satellites, not necessarily looking up or outward, but getting them to look down, especially to solve our problems. For Kenya, bringing it really down these are the 4 big issues, right? Whether it's food systems innovation, and we had that in the morning, whether it's issues around affordable housing and spatial planning, whether it's around dealing with health and health emergencies, or simply looking at how do we improve our manufacturing and capabilities. I've broken it down, the slide will be shared, but just making it very simple, that for private sector to invest, there has to be a problem and something that they need to solve. And for Kenya, if you look at the big 4, there's just so much opportunity in terms of where I say space and the space economy can begin to solve. And we had them, I think, I don't want to waste time in this, we had in all the previous panels, whether it's food systems, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's crop mapping, whether it's insurance, in terms of universal health, we know now during COVID-19, we saw very much around how the science of where, as Esri would say it, and location informatics was very important in terms of how we track and trace the spread of COVID-19. In terms of affordable housing, we know this is still a challenge, but urban planning and urbanization and how the future will be cities is going to be important on how we leverage technology and Earth observations. In Kenya, for example, with your traffic here, we know now that Uber opened up their data, including their geospatial data, to small and medium enterprises who are able to build on top of that capability to provide emergency services. And to that effect, we know now, for example, ambulances in Nairobi, response time have been reduced from about 1 hour 69 minutes to about 15 minutes. And we know that capability now is possible without necessarily having big infrastructure. Digital Earth Africa is in this room, of course, heavily championed by the government of Kenya, leveraging on space capabilities of other countries, but being able to, through a data cube, and to work with local companies, have been able to provide quite interesting solutions around that. So we know this is possible, and you can see there's a lot of faces, including Lieutenant Colonel Nyawade on that table. I think why invest? And why invest in Kenya? And I'm not saying why invest in space. I know there's a session tomorrow that is very much looking at the possibility of a space port in Kenya. But this is something that from Arizona State University and my colleagues working with NASA have identified quite interesting things. One is, of course, the space economy is going to grow anyway. It's heavily civilian, driven by private sector. In this region, we really have nothing that exists. We know space economy, as I've mentioned, can drive the economic sectors, and Kenya has potentially the necessary political stability, resources, and people. That is talent that can drive the economy. What we think, and this is what we think private sector can do, is how do we invest in space-related activities? How do we also revitalize what is existing and infrastructure that needs to be modernized? How do we ensure that we strike a balance between independence and interdependence by foreign influence? Because something about opportunities like this in most cases is skewed because of technology transfer. How do you ensure that the benefit of space continue to remain and benefit Kenya as much as benefits investors? I think finally is how do we continue such things? Powerful stakeholder engagement and public outreach so that communities, in a previous panel somebody mentioned, understand the benefits of space so that they can be a proponent of this. As we mentioned, Africa really is geographically positioned to be a space leader and powerhouse. We, together with the Imperial College and the Kenya Space Agency, are actually exploring the potential of a space port here that can drive this industry. Quickly, of course, Kenya, I don't have to mention all this. We know this is obvious. Earth tilts this way, easterly, spins eastwards, southerly facing at the equator is a no-brainer. Kenya is that location where you can build a space launching pad. Then, of course, finally, I think it starts with industry, as I've mentioned. And this is really always my call to private sector, is how do we ensure that we can work with government in a way that they provide enabling environment in terms of policy, but then private sector continue to invest across the ecosystem and supply chain for space. We've actually mapped this out in terms of the kind of investments we think government needs to create. And where also we need serious industry commitment, not just touch and go. There's also investments that can be plugged in place and ensuring that there's a community engagement. Finally, very practically, this is something that we are doing at Arizona State University. As you know, the International Space Station is going to be decommissioned. We are basically building this up together with Blue Origin and Sierra Space in terms of, we're calling it orbital reef. And this is something that Kenya can start to think about because we are looking at the next 8 years to have this up and running. So already an opportunity for this to be launched from here, and its many pieces as we continue to put it up there. The website is there if you want to know what we're doing with this particular initiative. Finally, I think, let me end with this few words. One, I think private sector needs to lead, enabled by government. We need to leverage space for its existing, for the core industries, honestly, and how the space sector can leverage our capabilities. It has to be two sides of the coin. I think capacity building is important. I think we still have a challenge with talent. So how do we build talent around the space ecosystem, including a space for small for SMEs and innovation hubs? I think we have about 52 in Kenya. How do we develop this launch pad that can offer opportunity for people who want to launch rockets from this area based on a geopolitical, geographic advantage? And I think finally, and this is what maybe we need to think about, is space should not be that far for people to understand and leverage. So how do we create, I think, an Earth and Space Entrepreneurship Center? And this is something that we are committed to work with the private sector so that local startups can be incubated to deal with the length and breadth of what space can offer. We've already started with this, so we, together with the president, 3 weeks ago, launched a full scholarship at no cost around global leadership and entrepreneurship that actually also includes space and space leadership and policy. For those who really want to do some advanced stuff, we're the first university to offer a Masters of Global Management in Space Leadership. We have people from Space Force. We are actually offering scholarships for African countries. So I suggest you look for me at some point, or Kate, my colleague at the back, to the extent of how can we begin to quickly build capability and put Africans in the environment of space and space technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for those remarks. Now we'd like to go into the question and answer. And before we pick questions from the floor, I would just take us through a few questions. And because we had already done the introductions as we began, and I will just request that when you get to start answering the question, please reintroduce yourself so that our delegates would know to whom to ask the question. So I'll begin. My first question goes to Sir. What are the levels of involvement of the private sector in the space sector in Africa? Please reintroduce yourself and pick that question.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Eric Nyadimo, CEO of Orca Services Limited, a geospatial solutions provider in Kenya and across East Africa. So you've asked a question in terms of private sector involvement in the space sector in Africa, and we find that the private sector is involved in a number of ways. One is in terms of acquisition of imagery, and that is done through the conventional aerial photography or through the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, or commonly known as drones. The private sector is also involved in supply of satellite imagery from the various satellite imagery providers, talking about Maxa, Airbus, Planet, and the rest. And also private sector is involved in processing of that particular data to be able to derive information that can then be used for different applications. Yeah, so we are seeing, of course, there's an increased involvement, especially in the area of drones, because it's a much easier investment for the private sector players. We haven't seen so much involvement when it comes to development of satellites or launching of satellites into space. I could say that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Madam, your response, what are your perspective in terms of the role of the private sector in the space sector?
My name is Susan Murabana. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Traveling Telescope. We are a social business, and what we do is promote astronomy and space education using different tools. We have a big portable telescope and a fixed planetarium in Nairobi, the Nairobi Planetarium, and a mobile planetarium. So we go to two main sectors. We go to schools, so education is our key thing, because we need the next space leaders, and we have to inspire the next generation of space leaders in the different sectors that can contribute. And the other part is tourism. So Kenya is uniquely placed. It's right at the equator. That means that we have the whole sky to view. And we also have things looking really nice when they're overhead, if you're looking at Saturn or the moon. And so it's a nice add-on to promote tourism, which we call astrotourism. And those are the main two contributors we bring on board in the private sector towards the space industry.
Thank you very much, Madam. Sir, what do you see as the challenges that the private sector faces in regards to the space industry?
My name is Dr. Sam Donko from All Nations University in Ghana. I personally was responsible in taking Ghana to space. At that time, even the government wasn't thinking about it, but I felt that the private sector could lead in this endeavor. If you look at the history of mankind traveling to space, initially, all of it was sponsored by government, but the dynamics are beginning to change. Everything is changing right now. The private sector is actively involved in it. And we need to, especially in Africa, governments should partner with the private sector, because we all know that the private sector can do things efficiently, cost effectively done. Sometimes government initiatives, it is something the government must support. They should contract out projects to the private sector, and not necessarily to compete with the private sector, but to leverage and to work together. I believe that once we do that, we'll be able to push private participation in the space sector way beyond what it is now. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, sir. Dr. Elkosi, a question for you. What opportunities do you see the private sector have in regards to the space industry?
If we speak about the involvement of private sector in space industry, I speak about Egypt. We have two issues: involvement of the private sector in space technology industry, and involvement of the private sector in the industries related to space services, space services. For the first one, involvement of the private sector in space technology, I can say it is very modest, or it is not exist in Egypt. So till now, there is no actual involvement of the private sector in space technology. But if we speak about involvement of the private sector in services related to space, like manufacture of receivers, satellite receivers, manufacturing of dishes, antennas, or routers, or other services related to mobile, these areas are very advanced because it is related directly to profit. It is related to profit, and this is what private sector is seeking for. Private sector is seeking for profit, speed, quick return of money. And this can be achieved by doing industry for services. In the agency, space agency, we completed what is called gap analysis between what the space industry needs and what is the actual case. We found that this gap is very wide in the space sector, but this gap is not has the same wideness or for the industry related to the government. In the space agency, we already have projects with industry related to the government, especially for making satellite structure, for making payloads, for making antennas, and so on. But on the other hand, we don't have any cooperation with private sector, not because we don't have, because the private sector till now is not able to offer what the space industry for technology is needed. This is the actual situation in which we face. And from the other hand, in the Egyptian Space Agency, we started to establish what is called incubators. And we invite young scientists or young engineers to make start-up projects related to solving actual problems in space technology. And that's in this way we can push this private sector to be involved in space industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Madam, one question for you. What are the areas you think are best practices that African countries, agencies, the space agencies in African countries, especially the private sector, can learn from other countries, especially the West, that are doing really great in terms of space industry?
Good question. I think we should be looking at ourselves internally, not trying to measure ourselves with the yardstick of other countries, but looking at what we have internally as resources, as Dr. Mohammed has said. How can, because I come from the SME perspective, from the startup perspective, you have different organizations as young startups coming up with ideas that could complement the private sector in what they're already doing. That's accelerating that in terms of either programs on top of what is being built, as well as, because when you are in the startup space, you are building very fast and very quickly, because the rate at which you are shipping is important, because that depends also on the market. So looking at what we have as resources and complementing that with the private sector, and of course government coming in to accelerate the process is fundamentally important. And we should maybe probably stop talking and doing more. Yeah, I think that's possibly what I could add to the conversation.
All right, thank you. And on the same question, slightly different though, what are the areas in the private sector that you think have not been really properly been explored in regards to opportunities in the space industry to the private sector? What are the areas that have not been properly explored?
I think in our case, one of course is funding, right? As we mentioned previously, there are a lot of investments that are going into the space economy is government. We've seen the Kenya Space Agency budget, right? It's about just 3 million. And so how does private sector work with government to complement how we can collaboratively build a space economy? The second unexplored area is collaboration with small and medium enterprises and academia. Our research institutions are honestly underused. Somebody talked about vanity something. They used an interesting word around projects that are just for not solving real world problems. Is how do we ensure that we can collaborate? For example, target an area, look at the space economy is big. I just talked about food. I know Dr. Catherine and the team are looking at crop mask, but we had issues of resolution, right? But then how do you also build the last mile application that you can monetize, whether it's insurance applications, and this is something that these guys are very good at, but then also private sector can actually invest in that space. So I see, the thing about Africa is there are many problems. And when I see problems, I see opportunity. Where we fail is we don't collaborate in how we can better fix this. Academia, honestly, I'm from that space. We need to step up. We need to recognize that our median age is 19. So we have a resource and a talent that is ridiculously innovative. Believe me, these guys are amazing. And then government that simply needs to enable. And that is where private sector, for me, can speak for innovators who may not necessarily be organized. Because private sector in most cases have a lobby group or a part of a, like a BMO, right? A business management, a business membership organization, but also have reach beyond the country in terms of just collaboration. And when I say sometimes private sector, when you see the many private sector companies here, they're not indigenous. They're American or European, but then have an office here. So that's also an opportunity in terms of how do we ensure that that technology transfer is also a little bit equitable. So those would be my comments.
Thank you so much. A pick-up point from there, bring the technology home and we can solve problems here. Thank you so very much. I would like to pick a few questions from the floor. We've done pretty good with the time, so I'm trying so much that we don't take more than 15 minutes or 10 in this question and answer. Please, if you have a question, go direct to the point. Mics on the floor. Who's going first? Any question to our panelists? One or two? Did we understand everything or did we not hear anything? either of any question? There's one? Oh, okay, great. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My question is, how can the private sector lobby? Because we've been informed. Around October, there will be a Kenya Space Bill that will be regulating the whole space economy in terms of private sector being able to, in terms of the nanosatellites, in terms of the launching pads, in terms of the radars and the sensors. How can the private sector engage the government such that there will be more stakeholder involvement? There will be more government support. Because a lot of times in terms of startups, we may have the laws, yes, but various bureaucratic processes usually prevent startups from growing further.
Thank you so much. Please, any of us who can take that question? I think it's directed to all of us. Yeah. And the vote goes to... All right.
I come from mostly outreach, so our company is trying to popularize astronomy and our night sky for various purposes. So we've been fortunate to be involved with the Ministry of Tourism. I think there's more that can be done. I imagine, you know, when you're flying into Kenya and you see a photo or a big billboard of our dark skies, because we're so removed from that world. We're removed from the fact that we need, you know, to appreciate our skies. We need to appreciate what we have up there. Not just for us, you know, in the cities, but think about the people in rural areas. For example, the Maasais and their wildlife are very connected to the night sky or the Samburus. And sometimes looking up makes us appreciate what's here. But as a Ministry of Tourism, is bringing us in other ways to bring revenue into the country, not just through the traditional beaches and, you know, going for a safari, but also having what we call Star Safari. So getting people to pay more. We were fortunate to have a pop idol, Madonna, look through our telescope during the height of the pandemic. But you can imagine the impact a celebrity like her would have and the money she'd spend in Kenya towards supporting education in a community that's really remote. And that's where she was. So yes, we need to work more with the ministries. For us, at least Ministry of Education and Tourism. And we are also already receiving that from at least the Ministry of Tourism.
Yes, sir.
Yes, so let me just see to add a few points onto the response to the question in terms of what can private sector do to push the government or get the government to be able to provide a conducive environment for the private sector. I think we're already doing that. If you look at the area of drones and drone technology, initially it was difficult to be able to make use of a drone and the private sector pushed until the drone regulations were formulated, and so they are in place, and with that we've seen a number of companies that are rising and being able to offer services related to drone technology. So that is in one way or another. The second way is that I've been privileged to chair a task force that is working on the survey policy, national survey policy. Sorry. And one of the things that we have done is to be able to mainstream the use of remote sensing technology insofar as mapping is actually concerned. So making it very clear that the government has to be able to provide funds and be able to provide that environment that would ensure that the remote sensing technology can actually be used to improve on mapping through various means. So this involvement can be through professional organizations, say like Institution of Surveyors of Kenya, or any other professional organization that you actually have there to try and push the government into a particular direction. Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. Yes.
On the bureaucracy, you spoke about the bureaucracy and what happens when a few players are only winning and preventing other people from winning. And addressing that from the perspective of the startup side, what has worked in terms of what I've seen in collaboration is working with an organization that is already in the market and helping you push your narrative in terms of what you're trying to provide. Because markets are there, everybody will try to block you from trying to, market leaders will try to create their own, they've already created their own market, and obviously they will prevent you. The incumbents will always prevent you from coming into their market. The idea is to create that spirit of collaboration, which I think is already happening in the market right now, but then the pace at which it's happening is not as accelerated as it should. So I guess maybe government and private sector should sit down and consider how they can also bring along the new innovators into the market, because at the end of the day, we will have the same innovations, same kind of technology tools that are being regurgitated in the market, and we are not advancing, and then we'll keep coming here and asking the same question, why are we not innovating? So that collaboration needs to happen at all levels.
Thank you very much. Any last two or one burning question? I may not lock you out. Any burning question? Or we close this session? Burning question 1? Burning question 2? Okay. 3? Okay, the session is closed. If you have any question, as our panelists will be available during the health break as we take tea, coffee, soya, chocolate out there, you can always ask the question. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you very much. And I would like to invite, please take back your seats, please. Careful on the stairs. Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, and I would like to invite Charles Mwangi from KSA. Yes, I would like to invite Director Charles Mwangi to hand over the gift for our keynote speaker. We did not forget about you. We remembered.
So, Brother Philip Digo, thank you again for having taken time to prepare for this session. Again, it was quite insightful. Have we given them a big round of applause? Again, and for the moderator as well. Thank you. Thank you, Brother Philip.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Yeah. All right. He's whispering in my ears. Wakenya. Kierere Wakenya. Okay. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. You've been a great audience. Thank you, panelists. I told you by the end of the next 3 days, well, this is already the first day. By the end of this conference, you will be full of knowledge. That I guarantee you, you know. So we are ending today's session. And but it's ending officially, but we can still continue networking, of course. We have tea served outside, I believe so. I hope I'm not wrong. We have snacks and tea served outside, so we can continue networking as we get ready for tomorrow. We have other sessions, very important ones. We'll be talking about climate change mitigation. We'll be talking about data access in developing countries. So be sure to be here at exactly 9 a.m. as we begin, so that we can end in time. Thank you so very much. I've been your moderator and MC Victoria Munga. Have a blessed evening.